So now we come to the Ecotype Project. How can we make sure that we are regenerating our living seed banks? So we saw the other versions of seed banks before. Now we move to in situ, IN space SITU, which means in place conservation, because ultimately this is the best of the best. This is what we want. These are these seeds adapting to the changing climates, to the beneficial insects, to the pests, to all the variations that are going on around them, really bioregionally or now ecoregionally adapting to their terroir. And when you do that, you can see that this is your gorgeous Joe Pyeweed and the Vernonia, the New York ironweed here. At the Hickory's Organic Farm in Ridgefield, Connecticut. These are our founder plots, which I'll explain in a bit, but you can see just how gorgeous these seeds are. And once they're back in our living seed banks, our soils, then the natural ockeries, again, the wind blows it, anemockery, myrmockery, the dispersal of seeds by ants. If you haven't looked into myrmecology, the sociological structuring of ants, fascinating. Thank you, Mr. E.O. Wilson. But now, okay, so now let's see, how do we do this? Because the fact is, so now you can see this is zoomed out a bit. So I'm talking from the perspective of Ecoregion 59, because that's where at CT NOFA, we have been focusing our work with the farmers here. And we're so glad that there's all the other NOFAs, because there's such great collaboration and skill sharing, especially as if you're hiring that pollinator network coordinator, that will be very helpful with this work, because we've been trying to aggregate all the folks who do this. The problem with ecotypic seed, so ecotypes are saying the wild genetics. So those wild types that we are collecting from the landscape, if you're talking about those place-based genetics, that's an ecotype. Now, these are all the different industries that use native ecotypic seed, or preferably would want to use native ecotypic seed, whether you're doing restoration, habitat creation or mitigation, all of our pollinator work. We really want to make sure we have the right plants in the right place, because let's say, the problem is that most of our native pollinator seed is sourced from the Midwest. And that means it's adapted to their climate and might have slightly different bloom times. So if you think about the 5-year migration of the monarch, well, if we have plants that are blooming too long, they miss the domino effect of when those milkweeds are blooming all the way down the coast. So even though it looks like maybe we're feeding more pollinators now, we actually might be doing them a disservice, because they're missing that ecological succession that goes down their migration path. So that is imperative to why we believe that it's so important to utilize this seed. This is a great study that I have in my resources, which comes out of MARS-B, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, and Ed Toth. I'm sorry to speak so quickly, but there's a lot to cover in 40 minutes. So Ed Toth, he is the one who's been championing safeguarding the ecotypes of the New York City boroughs. And with his work, they planted over 12 million plants in the New York City parks, and they just conducted this great study. He and Sarah Tangren, who were on the roundtable we hosted at the Northeast Organic Seed Conference, as Peggy mentioned, but they said people want this seed, but it doesn't exist. I mean, they usually only 15% of the time ecotypes are available locally for these different industries. Beyond that, you drive 400 miles, and if you drive 800 miles. So just like we had the conversations around knowing our food shed and our watershed and making sure we're buying local food, now it's time that we know our nursery growers and our botanists, and we start buying local native plants. So why, as the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Connecticut, are we interested in pollinator health? Well, as you can see, the blueberries on the left are not well pollinated, and the ones on the right are. So as Dina Brewster, our executive director, says, these entomological allies, these are friends who are out in the landscape, are actually paying her bills. So we need to make sure that we have the habitat and the food that they need, so that we can have the food security that we all need. It's a harmonious homeostasis that needs to be well respected, because we have the whole conversation of our lawns and there's no habitat and no food for all of them. Now it's our turn to say, on our farms, we need to have pollinator habitat. So the Ecotype Project largely functions under a USDA specialty crop block grant, where our specialty crop is this ecotypic seed, amplifying this ecotypic seed on organic farms in those founder plots that you saw, those beautiful rows we saw at the hickories. So again, just to review how we begin getting this seed sustainably with permission, with botanists who know what they're doing and how to collect it, how we get them from the wilds into cultivation and then to the nursery trade. We work with our botanists, they collect the wild seed, then we propagate that, put them into founder plots, which are 200 plants each on organic farms. Then I and others will come in, collect that seed, clean that seed, stratify it, then give it to our nursery partners, and they will grow it out as plugs and then make it available to the gardeners and the landscapers. And eventually, if we have enough, to the municipalities, because the Department of Transportation here in Connecticut is actually under a Pollinator Act that says if and when native seed is available, they have to use it, but it hasn't been available at the scales they need it at. So that's why we're working on bringing more farmers to supply this much in demand, undersupplied need for restoration at the scale that we all know it needs to be happening at. So with that, our pollinators are happy. We're fortifying our ecological corridors. All the great work of the pollinator pathway folks are planting the right plants to the right place, and giving our living seed banks what they need, and so forth. So here's Jordy Elkins, one of our main botanists at Highstead, scouting. This is Spartina. Hopefully, we're going to start getting into the halophytes, or the salt-tolerant species, to talk more about coastal restoration. And certainly, we work with a strategic roundtable of the Native Plant Working Group, different colleges and universities. And there are quite a few folks that we've gathered to figure out what species are we bringing into the pipeline. Now, this is predominantly dependent on the funding that we can receive to bring new species into the pipeline, because as you've seen, it's a long process and takes a lot of people to get the seeds from the wild into the nursery trade. And so far, these are the species that we're working with. We started with species that people would recognize, that are easy to work with, because we basically had to prove that there was a market for this. And we sure have, and these are so beautiful. And if I can tell you, as you'll see later, the ROI of seed, you plant one seed, and in 2 years, off of those 200 plants, we're collecting millions. So as I say, in the face of climate change, it's too late to be pessimistic. And, just planting one seed can really do a lot. So what do these beautiful plants look like? Here is the Penstemon digitalis, the beard tongue, and you can see it in its different stages throughout the season. This is a great friend of the hummingbirds, and just a gorgeous, gorgeous flower. And I think just a remarkable seed head as well. They kind of rattle, and you can see them ripening. So a seed is a fruit. So just like a fruit, a seed has its perfect time of maturity, and you have to be monitoring it. And as we'll see, I think let's see where that slide is. As we'll see later, they don't all ripen at the same time. So like, let's say the Joe Pye weed, when you see it get really fluffy and start to blow away, well, you harvest into a brown paper bag what's fluffy, but then you have to go back to get the rest, because if you're harvesting immature seed, that messes with your germination. And well, it would be like harvesting a vegetable or a fruit before it's at its perfect ripeness. So again, these are the different partners we work with for the founders plots. And I think we've gone over all of this as we rewild our landscapes and allow these, we reduce fragmentation with having these on our farms, in our backyards, everywhere that we can plant these habitats is important in that concept of rewilding, because as our wild areas get more separated, we're not just homeowners, but we're land stewards, and need to think of our yard as part of that citizen science. So in an effort to make sure that we're taking care of our pollinators throughout the seasons, we make sure that we have we're still working on the early spring ephemerals. Like those we don't have as much as we need in our pipeline. We're working on all of them actually to make sure that we can cover the different habitats, high and dry, wet, shady, everything you can think of, but also that they bloom through from early spring to late fall all throughout the year. I heard this wonderful woman from the South talk, and she said, um, it's like, y'all, if you invite house guests over for a week and only feed them on Monday. She said, if you have to make sure that we have food for them throughout the season. And as we've seen, and also with the different trophic layers. So that picture in the center, we think about perennial polycultures or the patterns of our natural wild forests. You can see that there's the ground covers and the shrubs and the trees, and different pollinators and insects and creatures need those different trophic layers for their habitats. So we want to make sure we incorporate that in our landscape. And as we've had these founders plots, it is just like a wild safari out there. Now, entomology is not my background, but I am sure learning. And it is just extraordinary to see diversity brings diversity. And if you're having problems on your farm, the more diversity you have, again, works for that homeostasis, because it's like lack and larder. You might have a lot of aphids and such, but then you're just missing whatever their predator is. So as we build this in, we see that the landscape is taking care of itself. And so we have different pollinators that visit our plants throughout the season and even throughout the day. So Jean Linville and Abby Cartson, who are the farmers at the Hickories for their founder plots, they said, we're not seeing the pollinators on the Rudbeckia hirta. Like, where are they? We don't get it. So one night they put on their red headlamp and went out at night. And lo and behold, there were the moths. And all these other pollinators were out at night. And so if you think about it, holy moly, right? You don't have to go to Africa to go on safari. You can go in your backyard. And they then did that, I don't know, maybe like once a week for the rest of the season. And they were amazed at what they saw. So you can see the wild bergamot down in that's the Monarda fistulosa, just beautiful species. So again, here is that Joe Pye weed, as I was saying. So you can see it's different phenology and morphology here, and you can see that as it's ripening. So the picture all the way on the bottom, I think you've let your seed go a little bit too long. But up in the top, or sorry, the second to last photo, that's about where you want to harvest it at. So that is when I would take my bag and start shaking those seeds off. So in an effort to bring more farmers or just anyone into the Ecotype project, well, these aren't exactly quite as easy as planting the annuals that maybe a lot of us are used to. So for farmers or for homeowners, we wanted to make a getting started toolkit. How do we plant these plants? How do I stratify a seed? What spacing does it need? What beneficial insects like them? All of these different questions we answered in these really cute 8x11 cards, and we have these black tin boxes, like the old school seed boxes. And we've made all of these cards that I'm going to show you, which are free PDFs at the bottom of our website, ctnofa.org/ecotype project, which I'm sure we'll put in the chat. And you can see that what we've done is we have our general growing protocols, our multi-year overview protocols, our general seed saving protocols. And these are a living document because we've been talking to all the experts in the area. Certainly you have Native Plant Trust, an amazing resource in Massachusetts and Nasami Farms. And we've talked to their propagators and heads of horticulture. And hopefully we're building a working group and a collaboration to really create a really vital resource for those of us in the Northeast, because in other areas of the country, in the Midwest and out in Oregon, which is like the great seed Wild West, where they've been doing all this type of work and restoration forever. They have to grow these types of seeds out on huge scales to do restoration after fires and such. But here in the Northeast, we're missing a bit of the supply chain from big seed extractories that can clean our seed to storage facilities and so forth. So we're really trying to fortify an ecotypic native seed production network, and hopefully these cards will help.